My name is Cordelia Fisher, and for the first 24 years of my life, I was a creature of the shadows, a permanent fixture in the background of my own family's grand portrait. I was the quiet anchor that kept the ship steady while my sister Eleanor stood at the prow, a beautiful figurehead catching all the light. They told me my worth was in my utility, in my silence, in my plainness that served only to amplify her brilliance. But I never imagined that the only man who would ever truly see me would be the one who couldn't see at all. I never expected that his blindness would become the lens through which the utter hollowness of my family's world was finally exposed, and that the quiet love we found would be the sweetest, most unintentional revenge of all. Our family, the Fishers, operated on a simple and brutal economy of beauty. My father, Lord Fisher, was a man consumed by ledgers and the ever-present fear of dwindling finances, a worry that etched new lines onto his face with each passing year. He loved us, I think, in his own distracted way, but his attention was a currency he spent mostly on his accounts. My mother, Lady Fisher, was the true architect of our lives. Her ambition was a relentless driving force, and her entire life's work was focused on a single dazzling project. My older sister, Eleanor. Eleanor was her masterpiece. From birth, she had been blessed with the kind of incandescent beauty that stopped conversations and started whispers. She had hair like spun gold, eyes the color of a summer sky, and a grace that seemed divinely bestowed. She was the diamond of the season before she had even made her debut, and our family's future, my mother believed, would be built upon the foundation of the magnificent match Eleanor was destined to make. Before I dive into the story of the silent war fought in the gilded ballrooms and manicured gardens of the London season, a war of whispers and worth, could you do me a small favor? Let me know where you're watching from in the comments below. It's always so wonderful to see how far these stories travel. And if you've ever felt invisible, or had your value decided for you by someone else, please hit that like button so I know I'm not alone. And of course, if you're new here, I'd be honored if you'd subscribe to join a community that understands, truly understands, that what's on the inside is what defines us. The London season that year began with a tremor of excitement that quickly escalated into a full-blown earthquake of gossip. The cause was the arrival of a single man, Duke Alexander Blackwood. His name was on everyone's lips, a cocktail of tragedy, heroism, and immense wealth that was utterly intoxicating to the society hostesses and their ambitious mamas. The Blackwood title was old and respected, but Alexander was new to it. He had inherited it unexpectedly after his uncle and cousin had perished in a boating accident just months before. This alone would have made him a prize, but there was more. He was a decorated war hero, lauded for his bravery on the continent, and he was, by all accounts, staggeringly wealthy, with estates that sprawled across 3 counties, and investments that touched every corner of the empire. There was, however, a catch, a detail whispered with a mixture of pity and morbid fascination. In the final, chaotic battle that had secured his fame, an explosion had taken his sight. Duke Alexander Blackwood was completely blind. And then there was me, Cordelia. If Eleanor was a diamond, I was the sensible wool cloth she was polished with. I was plain. It was not a cruel assessment, merely a factual one, repeated so often it had become as much a part of my identity as my own name. I had my father's quiet disposition, mousy brown hair that refused to hold a curl, and eyes that were more observant than alluring. My role in the family was one of quiet competence. I was the one who read to my father when his eyes grew tired, who managed the household staff with a calm efficiency that belied my age, who mended the delicate lace on Eleanor's gowns when it tore, who sat for hours while my sister practiced her curtsies and her witty yet unsubstantial conversational gambits. I was useful, necessary even, but I was not ornamental. And in my mother's world, what was not ornamental was, by definition, secondary. I was a stagehand in the grand production of Eleanor's life, and I had long ago accepted my place in the wings. I read books, I found solace in music, and I cultivated a rich inner world that no one in my family ever thought to ask about. It was my secret garden, a place where my worth wasn't measured by the symmetry of my features or the luster of my hair. For my mother, this tragic detail was little more than a footnote, an inconvenience to be managed. A blind duke was still a duke. His title was not blind. His fortune was not blind. It might even be an advantage, she declared one afternoon, while inspecting a new bolt of silk for a ball gown for Eleanor. He will not be distracted by lesser beauties. He will need a wife who is a true duchess, a woman whose perfection can be felt in her presence, whose grace is unmistakable. She looked at Eleanor, her gaze filled with the unwavering certainty of a master craftsman admiring her finest work. He will need you, my dear, The strategy was immediately set into motion. Our house became a war room dedicated to the conquest of the Duke. Books on the Blackwood family history were procured. The names of his estates were memorized. His known preferences in music, food, and wine were drilled into Eleanor as if she were studying for a vital examination. And above all, the focus on her appearance intensified to a fever pitch. Gown fittings were daily, consultations with hairdressers were endless, and discussions about which jewels best complemented her eyes were the primary topic of conversation at our dinner table. My role, as always, was supportive and invisible. I was tasked with reading aloud the breathless accounts from the society pages, my voice a monotone drone as I listed the Duke's virtues and assets. It is said his town residence on Grosvenor Square is being entirely refitted to accommodate his needs, I would read, and that he navigates his world with a cane of polished ebony and silver. Inside, a strange mix of pity and curiosity stirred within me. I tried to imagine his world, a world of darkness populated only by sounds, scents, and textures. It seemed a lonely existence. For my mother and sister, however, he was not a man, but a collection of desirable attributes. A title, a fortune, a hero's reputation. The man himself was secondary to the prize he represented. The night of the Lawford Ball, where the Duke was set to make his first official appearance, the air in our home was thick with tension, and the scent of Eleanor's French perfume. She was a triumph of my mother's planning. Her gown was a confection of celestial blue silk, embroidered with tiny seed pearls that shimmered like captured starlight. Diamonds glittered at her throat and in her golden hair. She was objectively the most beautiful woman I had ever seen. When she descended the main staircase, even my father put down his ledger and stared, a rare smile of paternal pride on his face. "Magnificent, my dear," he murmured. My mother beamed, her eyes sweeping over Eleanor with a look of triumphant ownership. Then her gaze fell on me. I was dressed in a simple gown of dove gray, a hand-me-down altered to fit. It was neat, presentable, and designed to fade into the wallpaper. "Cordelia, do try not to lurk in the corners tonight," my mother said, her voice sharp. "Stand behind your sister. Your plainness will provide an excellent contrast to her radiance." It wasn't meant to be cruel, it was simply tactical. I was a prop. I nodded, the familiar sting of her words having long ago lost its power to draw tears. The ballroom was a dazzling assault on the senses. 1,000 candles burned in crystal chandeliers, their light refracting into a million tiny rainbows. The orchestra swelled with a soaring waltz, and the air was heavy with the mingled scents of perfume, beeswax, and champagne. Eleanor made her entrance, and as my mother had predicted, a wave of admiration followed her. Young lords and old dandies alike turned to watch her pass, their gazes hungry and appreciative. She was in her element, bestowing dazzling smiles and offering her gloved hand with the practiced grace of a queen. I followed in her wake, a small gray ship trailing a magnificent galleon, and found a quiet alcove near the terrace doors, content to watch the spectacle unfold. "Your Grace," my mother said, her voice dripping with honeyed deference. "Forgive my forwardness, but I could not let the moment pass. May I present my eldest daughter, Miss Eleanor Fisher." Eleanor performed a deep, perfect curtsy, a movement she had practiced for weeks. She rose, her face a vision of loveliness. "It is a profound honor, Your Grace," she said, her voice clear and bright. "The entire city has been in a state of breathless anticipation for your arrival." The Duke inclined his head. "You are too kind, Miss Fisher." His voice was deeper than I had expected, a low baritone with a gravelly edge. It was a voice that commanded attention without having to raise its volume. He was polite, but his face remained a handsome, unreadable mask. "I am told the orchestra is quite skilled this evening," he said, a simple conversational opening. Eleanor, who had been drilled on his lineage and land holdings but not on the nuances of music, faltered for a fraction of a second. "Oh yes, it is lovely, is it not?" she replied. It was a generic, empty response. He did not reply, merely tilted his head again, listening. After what felt like an eternity of strategic circling, my mother saw her opportunity. Duke Blackwood had arrived. He stood near the grand fireplace, a tall, imposing figure dressed in immaculate black. He held himself with a military stillness, his head angled as if he were cataloging the room by sound alone. An ebony cane was held loosely in one hand, but he did not seem to lean on it. He was guided by his valet, a man with a perpetually worried expression. My mother seized my sister's arm. "Now," she hissed, and propelled her forward. I watched from my alcove as my mother executed a flawless social maneuver, intercepting the Duke as he was about to be introduced to another family. An awkward silence began to stretch. Eleanor, accustomed to her beauty filling any conversational void, began to flounder. She tried to play her strongest card, the one that had never failed her. "I am wearing blue tonight, Your Grace," she offered, a hint of coquettishness in her tone. "They say it matches my eyes." The Duke's expression did not change. "I am certain it is a lovely shade, Miss Fisher." There was no warmth in his words. It was a statement of fact, polite but utterly detached. Desperate, she tried again. "And the room is so full of beauty tonight. Lady Ashworth is in a truly dreadful shade of puce, but everyone else looks simply divine." Her words, meant to be charmingly catty, fell into a void. To a man who could not see, her observations were meaningless, like describing colors to a man born in a world of gray. I froze. My mother shot me a look that was a clear command. Be brief, be silent, do not engage. But his question hung in the air, and it seemed genuine. I took a small breath. "I think it's a waltz by a new Viennese composer, Your Grace," I began, my voice gaining a little confidence. The violins seemed to be chasing the cellos, like a playful argument that no one truly wishes to win. "Can you hear it? The way the melody rises just there, in the middle of the refrain, it feels like taking a deep, clean breath after a long and dreary winter." I stopped, horrified at my own rambling. I had said far too much. I had broken the rules. I waited for my mother's wrath, or the Duke's polite dismissal. My mother, sensing disaster, moved to end the exchange. She stepped forward, gesturing vaguely in my direction. "And this," she said, her tone dismissive, a mere footnote, "is my other daughter, Cordelia." I was so startled at being acknowledged at all that I nearly forgot to curtsy. I dipped clumsily, my face flushing with heat. "Your Grace," I murmured, my voice barely a whisper. The sound, quiet as it was, seemed to cut through the din of the ballroom. The Duke's head turned sharply, his unseeing eyes seeming to fix on the spot where I stood. "Miss Fisher," he said again, but this time the tone was different. It was infused with a flicker of interest. He posed the same question to me. "And what do you think of the music?" Instead, the Duke was utterly still. A long moment passed. Then, a slow, small smile touched his lips, transforming his stern face. "An argument no one wishes to win," he repeated, his voice soft, with something that sounded like wonder. "Yes, that is a perfect description." He took a half-step toward me, away from Eleanor. "And the room, Miss Fisher? My valet tells me it is opulent. What is your impression?" My mother and sister stared, their faces a mixture of confusion and burgeoning fury. This was not how the script was supposed to go. I glanced at them, then back at the Duke's expectant face. I decided to answer him honestly. "It is very bright, Your Grace. Almost painfully so. The candlelight makes the jewels on the ladies' gowns glitter like shards of ice, but the scent is what is most overwhelming. There is the beeswax from the candles, of course, but underneath it all is the heavy perfume of gardenias from the floral arrangements. It's almost too sweet, too thick to breathe." The cool night air of the terrace was a welcome relief. Below us, the formal gardens lay bathed in moonlight, a monochrome world of silver and shadow. For a few moments, we stood in a comfortable silence, listening to the muted sounds of the ball behind us and the gentle splash of a distant fountain. "Thank you, Miss Fisher," he said finally, turning his face toward the garden. "My valet means well, but his descriptions are rather literal. There are many flowers, Your Grace. He does not capture the poetry of a place." I smiled, though I knew he could not see it. "He is a man of prose, perhaps, not poetry." "Gardenias," he said, a strange, thoughtful expression on his face. "My mother used to grow them." He paused, then said, "The air in here feels used, stagnant. Would you be so kind as to guide me to the terrace? I am told it overlooks the gardens." He extended his arm. For a dizzying moment, I thought he was offering it to Eleanor, that this was his polite way of returning to the designated beauty of the evening. But his arm was extended in my direction. Unequivocally, my mother's mouth opened, then snapped shut. Eleanor's beautiful face was pale with shock. Hesitantly, my heart hammering against my ribs, I placed my fingers on his proffered arm. His hand immediately came to rest over mine, a gesture that was both steadying and proprietary. Without another word to my mother or sister, he allowed me to guide him through the crowd, leaving the diamond of the season and her ambitious mother standing in stunned silence in our wake. "And you are a woman of poetry," he stated, not as a question, but as a fact. "Describe the sky for me, if you would be so kind." I looked up. The sky was a vast expanse of dark velvet, clear and deep. "It is not black," I began softly. "It is the deepest shade of indigo, a velvet so dark it seems you could touch it. And the stars are not just white dots, some are tiny, sharp pinpricks of silver, while others are larger, softer, glowing with a buttery yellow light. There is a sliver of a moon, shaped like a clipped thumbnail, and its light is just enough to turn the edges of the clouds into silver lace. He listened with an intensity that was almost unnerving. It felt as though he were absorbing my words through his skin. When I finished, he let out a long, slow breath. "The stars," he said, his voice quiet and laced with a profound melancholy. "That is what I miss the most. The silent, steady company of the stars. You have given me a glimpse of them again. Thank you." "Mama, I did nothing," I said, my own voice trembling slightly. His Grace asked me questions. It would have been rude not to answer. "Answer?" she scoffed, her voice rising. "You lectured him, on music, on the sky, as if you were some sort of poetess. Your place is to be silent, your place is to be invisible. He is meant for Eleanor. Do you understand? You are not to speak to him again." Eleanor finally spoke, her voice thick with tears and a genuine deep-seated confusion that was almost more painful than my mother's anger. "He didn't even look at me," she whispered, as if the concept were impossible to grasp. "He stood right in front of me, and he didn't see me. He just listened to you. It was so peculiar. He never even asked about my dress." She wasn't just upset about losing a potential suitor. Her entire understanding of the world, a world in which her beauty was the most powerful currency, had been shaken to its core. She could not comprehend a transaction in which it held no value. The carriage ride home was a masterclass in frigid silence. The air crackled with my mother's unspoken rage. Eleanor stared out the window, her perfect profile etched against the passing gaslights, a single silent tear tracing a path down her cheek. I sat opposite them, my hands clasped tightly in my lap, the feel of the Duke's arm still a warm and solid presence in my memory. The moment the front door of our house closed behind us, the storm broke. "What, precisely, did you think you were doing?" my mother demanded, her voice low and shaking with fury. She rounded on me in the grand entryway, her eyes blazing. "You deliberately humiliated your sister. You made her look a fool. All our work, all our planning, compromised by your selfish, arrogant display." In that moment, standing on a moonlit terrace, he was not Duke Blackwood, the season's greatest prize. He was simply Alexander, a man living in a world of darkness who missed the stars. And I was not Cordelia, the plain, overlooked sister. I was a storyteller, a painter of worlds. We spoke for nearly an hour. We did not speak of society, or titles, or marriage prospects. We spoke of books we had both read, of the sound of rain on a slate roof, of the scent of old leather and wood smoke in a library. He told me about the sounds of the battlefield, not the heroic clashes, but the small human sounds, the murmur of men's voices before a charge, the creak of a saddle, the way the wind whistled through the ruins of a church. He spoke of his world of sound and memory, and I spoke of my world of quiet observation. It was a meeting of two solitudes, a connection forged in a language that had nothing to do with appearances. When he finally guided me back to the ballroom, my mother and sister were waiting, their faces like thunderclouds. They had witnessed the entire inexplicable exchange from the doorway, and their fury was a palpable thing. The plan had not just gone awry, it had been utterly and completely derailed, and somehow, impossibly, I was the one holding the controls. I retreated to my room, my mother's angry words ringing in my ears. But beneath the hurt and confusion, a tiny, unfamiliar ember of something else had begun to glow. For the first time in my life, someone had preferred my company to my sister's. Someone had listened to my words and found value in them. He hadn't seen a plain face or a simple gown. He had heard a voice, a mind, and he had been interested. The next afternoon, the ember was fanned into a small flame. A delivery arrived from a Mayfair florist. A footman brought in a truly breathtaking bouquet of white roses and lilies, so large it required 2 hands to carry. The card, of course, was addressed to Miss Eleanor Fisher. My mother seized it with a look of relief. "Ah, you see, an apology. He is making amends for his strange behavior." Eleanor took the flowers, her expression brightening, but the footman was still there, holding a small, square box. "And this, my lady," he said, holding it out to me, "for Miss Cordelia Fisher." Her commands, however, were impossible to follow. The Duke was a man of quiet but unshakable determination. At every social event that followed, he sought me out. It was always done with impeccable propriety. He would pay his respects to my mother, offer a polite compliment to Eleanor, and then, somehow, he would find a way to draw me into a conversation that excluded everyone else. At a showing at the Royal Academy of Arts, my mother and sister tried to guide him, describing the paintings to him in the most literal terms. "Here is a portrait of a general, Your Grace," Eleanor said, standing before a grand canvas. "He is very stern and has a great many medals." The Duke listened patiently, then turned his head slightly. "Miss Cordelia, what do you see?" My mother froze. I took the box, my fingers fumbling with the ribbon. Inside, nestled on a bed of tissue, was a single, perfect white gardenia. Its scent, so much purer and sweeter than the overpowering perfume of the ballroom, filled the air. Beneath it lay a small, thick card. In elegant black ink, it read, "For the voice that paints the stars." Meaning, it was not a public apology. It was a private message, a secret acknowledgement of the connection we had shared. It was more intimate and more meaningful than 1,000 roses. "What is it?" my mother demanded, snatching the card from my hand. She read it, and her face went pale with fury. "This is an insult," she hissed. "He is mocking us. He is treating you like a curiosity. You will not acknowledge this. You will not encourage him. This ends now." She threw the card into the fireplace, but she could not extinguish the small, steady flame that was now burning brightly within my chest. A genuine, warm laugh escaped the Duke's lips. It was a wonderful sound, rich and completely unreserved. "A nervous heart," he chuckled. "You have a gift, you know. A gift for seeing what is truly there." He spent the rest of the walk asking me questions about the sounds of the children's laughter, the scent of the damp earth, the feel of the spring breeze. Eleanor tried to interject with more society gossip, her voice growing increasingly shrill, but the Duke would always gently but firmly steer the conversation back to me. We were walking in a bubble of our own making, and my mother and sister could only watch from the outside, their exclusion making them more furious with each passing moment. I hesitated, remembering my mother's orders, but the expectant silence from the Duke was more compelling. I looked at the painting, not at the subject, but at the artistry. The artist used a great deal of dark, heavy oils. Your Grace, the general's face is a landscape of shadows. His eyes are what is most compelling. They are not merely stern, they are profoundly weary, as if he is haunted by the very victories his medals celebrate. The background is a swirl of smoke and dark clouds. I do not think it is a portrait of a hero. I believe it is a story of loneliness, the terrible isolation of command. The Duke was silent for a long moment. "The isolation of command," he repeated softly. "Yes, I imagine that artist understood his subject very well." He made no move to proceed to the next painting, content to stand there, exploring the world I had built for him with my words. My mother had to physically take Eleanor's arm and drag her away, her frustration a palpable wave in the air. A few days later, he happened upon us during our afternoon walk in Hyde Park. The park was crowded, a vibrant tapestry of London life. Eleanor immediately began a running commentary on the society figures present. "Oh, there is Lady Danbury with her new husband. They say he is dreadfully dull. And look at the bonnet on Miss Gable. It is simply scandalous." The Duke listened with half an ear, his face impassive. Then he turned to me. "Describe the unimportant people for me, Cordelia," he said, using my given name for the first time. The quiet familiarity of it sent a jolt through me. My mother stiffened, but I could not refuse him. "There is a little boy, no older than 5, with a bright red kite," I began, my voice low. "He is running so hard he is about to trip over his own feet. The kite keeps dipping and soaring, like a nervous heart taking flight. And over there, on a bench under the great oak, there is an old couple. They are not speaking, just sharing a bag of roasted chestnuts. And every so often the gentleman nudges a nut toward his wife's hand. They have the comfortable silence of people who have said everything that needs to be said, and found it was enough." The true declaration of his intentions, the move that my mother could not ignore or explain away, came a week later. A formal, liveried footman delivered an invitation to our door. It was from the Duke of Blackwood, requesting the pleasure of the Fisher ladies' company for tea at his residence on Grosvenor Square. My mother's face lit up with triumph, believing he had finally come to his senses. But then she read the final line of the embossed card. Her face fell. "And His Grace specifically requests," she read aloud, her voice tight with disbelief, "that Miss Cordelia Fisher might be prevailed upon to bring a volume of Mr. Keats's poetry, from which she might be persuaded to read." It was a direct, unambiguous, and public statement of preference. He was not inviting the beautiful Miss Fisher and her relations. He was inviting a reader, and her family was merely the required escort. It was a gauntlet thrown down, a challenge to the entire foundation of my family's social strategy. Finally, when the tea had been poured and the cakes served, He turned his full attention to me. "Miss Fisher, Cordelia, I believe you brought something for me." His voice cut through my mother's chatter, silencing her mid-sentence. All eyes were on me. My hands trembled as I opened the small leather-bound volume of Keats. My mother was glaring at me, a silent, furious command to refuse. But I looked at Alexander's face, at the way his head was tilted towards me, at the quiet anticipation in his expression, and I found a strength I did not know I possessed. I began to read. I chose Ode to a Nightingale, not a poem of grand romance, but one of sensory immersion, of a beauty so intense it borders on pain. My voice, usually so quiet, filled the silent drawing room. I did not just read the words, I felt them. I poured all of my own quiet longing, my own love for the secret, unseen world, into the poet's lines. The tea was an excruciatingly tense affair. The Duke's townhouse was magnificent, filled with beautiful things that he would never see. He navigated the rooms with an astonishing confidence, his hand brushing lightly against a wall or a piece of furniture, mapping the space in his mind. He was the epitome of grace and charm, a perfect host, but his attention was a focused beam, and it was aimed squarely at me. Eleanor, dressed in a stunning afternoon gown of pale primrose, tried desperately to capture his interest. She commented on the richness of the draperies, the beauty of the porcelain, the exquisite pattern of the Persian rug. "It is a most remarkable shade of crimson, Your Grace," she said, gesturing to the rug. "You have impeccable taste." "My mother had impeccable taste, Miss Fisher," he replied politely, but without warmth. "I merely inhabit the house." My mother attempted to list Eleanor's many accomplishments, her skill at watercolors, which was mediocre, her needlepoint, uninspired, her ability to play a single simple piece on the pianoforte. The Duke listened to it all with a patient smile, waiting. Alexander did not move. He sat perfectly still in his chair, his hands resting on his ebony cane. I could see the muscles in his jaw tighten slightly. A slight smile played on his lips when I read of beaded bubbles winking at the brim. His face was a study in profound, focused emotion. He was not just hearing the poem, he was living it through me. When I finished, the silence in the room was absolute. It stretched for a long, heavy moment, broken only by the ticking of a mantel clock. Eleanor and my mother looked utterly baffled, as if I had just performed some strange and incomprehensible magic trick. This was not courtship as they understood it. This was something else entirely, something they had no frame of reference for. "Thank you," Alexander said at last, his voice thick with emotion. "You do not simply read the words, Cordelia. You give them a soul. You make me see them." He reached out his hand across the space between us. Instinctively, I placed my own in his fingers closed around mine, his grip warm and firm. It was a gesture of such profound connection, so completely devoid of social artifice, that it felt more intimate than a kiss. My mother made a small, strangled sound. For her, this was the ultimate humiliation. The Duke was not courting her beautiful daughter. He was treating her plain one, not even as a potential bride, but as a paid reader, an entertainer. The fact that the Duke's admiration was clearly genuine and deeply felt was a nuance she was completely incapable of grasping. My heart aches, and a drowsy numbness pains my sense, as though of hemlock I had drunk. The culmination of the season, and of my mother's grand campaign, was the annual masked ball at the Marquess of Ashworth's country estate, a sprawling palace of a house famous for its magnificent gardens. This, my mother decided, was to be the final battlefield. Here Eleanor would secure her prize. She spared no expense. Eleanor's costume was that of Diana, the huntress goddess. She was a vision in shimmering silver tissue, with a crescent moon of diamonds in her hair. She was so breathtakingly beautiful that it seemed impossible any man could resist her. My costume, by contrast, was designed for anonymity. I was given a simple hooded domino cloak of dark gray silk and a plain black mask. I was a shadow, my only purpose to follow and observe, a silent witness to my sister's anticipated triumph. The confrontation that night was the worst yet. My mother cornered me in the library, her face a mask of cold fury. "This has gone far enough," she said, her voice dangerously quiet. "You are deliberately and maliciously ruining your sister's future. It is your jealousy. It has always been your jealousy, festering away because she is beautiful, and you are not. You see a chance to wound her, to take something for yourself for once, and you are seizing it like a greedy little urchin." The words were like stones, each one striking a bruise I didn't know I had. "That is not true, Mama," I whispered, my heart aching. "I have done nothing to encourage him." "You have done everything," she spat. You flaunt your little parlor tricks, your descriptions, and your poetry. You have bewitched him with your strange ways. From this moment on, you are forbidden to speak to him unless you are directly addressed, and if you are, your answers will be one word. Do you understand me, Cordelia? One word. You will not ruin this family's one great chance. I felt something inside me break. It was not my heart, but the last, fragile thread of hope that my mother might one day see me, the real me, and find something there to value. She did not want a daughter, she wanted a beautiful, obedient tool for her ambition, and I, by my very nature, was a flawed instrument. My mother's plan was as theatrical as it was desperate. You will lure him into the gardens, she instructed Eleanor in a low, urgent whisper before we left. Specifically, into the famous hedge maze. It is romantic, secluded. You will have him to yourself. You must make him see that you are the only woman for him. You must be charming, witty, enchanting. Her eyes then flicked to me. And you, she ordered, will make yourself scarce. Find the ladies' retiring room and stay there. The implication was clear. I was a liability, a contaminant that must be kept as far from the target as possible. Then, disaster struck. They took a wrong turn, then another. The sound of the orchestra from the ballroom grew fainter, distorted by the dense walls of greenery. They were well and truly lost. Eleanor's composure, always so flawless, began to crack. I believe the exit should be this way, she said, her voice losing its confident lilt. A few minutes later, after hitting another dead end, panic began to set in. I don't understand. It all looks the same. I can't see the way out. Her voice was high and strained, bordering on hysterical. The huntress goddess was lost in her own forest. As the evening wore on, I watched as Eleanor put the plan into motion. She found the Duke, and with a dazzling smile and a light touch on his arm, suggested a walk in the cool night air. I saw him hesitate for a moment, his head turning slightly as if listening for someone else, but he consented. I felt a pang of something. Disappointment? Fear? I could not obey my mother. A strange protective instinct I couldn't explain compelled me to follow them, keeping a safe distance, melting into the shadows of the colonnades that lined the terrace. I watched them disappear into the dark yew-hedged entrance of the labyrinth. Inside the maze, Eleanor began her assault. I could hear the bright, artificial cadence of her voice echoing faintly through the hedges. She was relying on her old, failed tactics, trying to describe the beauty he could not see. The moonlight is just divine on my gown, your grace, it makes the silver glow. I wish you could see it. She tried to describe the maze itself, but her vocabulary was limited to the visual and the superficial. It is very green. The hedges are quite tall. It is most impressive. He was polite, his replies monosyllabic. The vibrant connection I had felt with him was absent. In its place was a sterile, awkward courtesy. I could sense his patience wearing thin. Hearing the raw fear in her voice, I could not stay hidden. My mother's orders were forgotten. I slipped into the maze, my soft-soled slippers making almost no sound on the gravel path. I did not rely on sight. I closed my eyes for a moment, and I listened. I could hear the faint, rhythmic splash of the fountain that I knew stood in the center of the maze. I could feel the direction of the gentle night breeze on my cheek, a breeze I knew was blowing from the direction of the open terrace. I noted the texture of the path beneath my feet. The main routes were laid with smooth, water-worn stones, while the dead ends were rougher gravel. I became a creature of my other senses, navigating the darkness as he did every day. I found them standing at a dead end, the yew hedge towering over them like a green cliff. Eleanor was wringing her hands, her beautiful face streaked with tears of frustration and humiliation. "This is impossible. We are trapped," she cried. The Duke stood silently beside her, his face a grim, stony mask. My soft footstep on the gravel made him turn his head instantly. "Cordelia," he said. It was not a question, it was a statement of profound relief. My name on his lips was like a light being switched on in the darkness. Eleanor spun around, her eyes wide with shock and anger. "Cordelia, what are you doing here? I told you to stay away. Never mind that. Just get us out of this dreadful place." Her command was born of desperation. I ignored her tone and addressed the Duke, my voice calm and even. "The central fountain is to our left, Your Grace. I can hear it. If we keep the sound of it just over our right shoulder and follow the path with the smoother stones, it will lead us to the center. From there, it is a straight walk back to the entrance. Can you feel the breeze? It is coming from the ballroom." I became his guide, his navigator. I did not take his arm, but walked just ahead, my quiet descriptions of the path and the sounds creating a map for him in the darkness. He followed without hesitation, his trust in me absolute. Eleanor trailed behind us, her earlier confidence shattered, reduced to a sullen, silent follower. They told me I had lost my world when I lost my sight, he began, his voice low and intense, a resonant hum that seemed to vibrate in the very air between us. For a long time I believed them. My world had become a dark, silent room, and I was a prisoner within it. He took a step closer. But then I met you, and you opened the windows, you let the world back in. You paint it for me with your words. Your voice is my light in the darkness, Cordelia. It is my compass. He paused, and his next words were aimed not at me, but at the space where Eleanor stood. The world tells me your sister is a great beauty. I am sure it is true, but it is a truth I cannot perceive. It is a language I no longer speak. Her beauty is irrelevant to me. Eleanor made a small wounded sound, like a gasp of pain. Alexander reached out and took my hand. His fingers were warm and strong around mine. I do not need to see your face to know the beauty of your soul. I hear it in your voice. I feel it in your kindness. I recognize it in the sharpness of your mind and the peace you carry within you. The world my wife must navigate will be one of sound and touch and trust. A world of quiet intimacy, not public display. His grip on my hand tightened. Cordelia Fisher, I have no idea what you look like. And I have discovered to my great joy that I do not care in the slightest. What I care about is everything else you are. He took a deep breath, and in the moonlit clearing, surrounded by the scent of night-blooming jasmine, he asked the question that would shatter my family's world. Will you marry me? We reached the center of the maze, a small circular clearing where a marble fountain splashed peacefully under the moonlight. It was a pocket of serenity in the confusing labyrinth. Here Eleanor made her final desperate stand. She stepped forward, placing a hand on the Duke's arm. Your Grace, Alexander. This evening has been so overwhelming, she began, her voice trembling, trying to manufacture a moment of romantic intimacy from the ashes of her failure. But the Duke did not seem to hear her. He gently removed her hand from his arm and turned his body fully towards me, his unseeing eyes searching for my face. Time seemed to stop. The splashing of the fountain, the distant music, the frantic beating of my own heart, it all receded into a dull hum. Staring at the face of the man who saw me more clearly than anyone ever had, there was only one possible answer. It rose from a place of deep, quiet certainty within me. Yes, I whispered, the word a mix of awe and acceptance. Yes, Alexander, I will. A slow, radiant smile spread across his face, a smile of pure, unadulterated joy. It was the most beautiful thing I had ever seen. The spell was broken by a strangled gasp from behind us. Eleanor stared, her face a mask of utter disbelief and outrage, and just beyond the entrance to the clearing, drawn by the sound of our voices, stood my mother. Her face was a storm of fury, her dreams turning to dust before her very eyes. The announcement of our engagement the following day sent shockwaves through society. It was the scandal and the surprise of the season. The plain Fisher sister, the quiet shadow, had captured the blind Duke. The irony was exquisite, and the gossips feasted on it. How had it happened? What arts had the quiet one used? My mother tried desperately to control the narrative, spinning tales of a deep intellectual connection she had fostered all along, of Cordelia's quiet virtues finally winning the day. But no one believed her. They had all seen her, night after night, pushing the beautiful Eleanor into the Duke's path. They had all seen him turn away from the diamond to converse with the dove-gray shadow. The Fishers were not seen as clever strategists. They were seen as fools who had failed to recognize the true treasure in their own house. Eleanor, with a choked sob, turned and fled, disappearing back into the winding paths of the maze. My mother, however, marched forward, her silk skirts rustling with her fury. This is a trick, she accused, her voice shaking. A cruel, calculated trick. Cordelia, you have manipulated him. You trapped him in here to force this absurdity. Before I could even form a response, Alexander stepped slightly in front of me, a protective gesture that was both subtle and absolute. He was no longer the quiet, attentive listener. He was the Duke of Blackwood, and his voice held the cold, hard weight of his title. On the contrary, madam, he said, his tone like chipped ice. Your daughter has just freed me. The only trap I was in tonight was one of superficiality and empty chatter. A trap I believe you set yourself. Now if you will excuse us, my fiancé and I wish to return to the ballroom. The word fiancé hung in the air, a definitive, unassailable fact. He offered me his arm, and with one last, withering glance in my mother's direction, he guided me out of the labyrinth, leaving her alone with the ruins of her life's ambition. The aftermath at home was a landscape of devastation. My mother locked herself in her room for 2 days. My father retreated so far into his ledgers that he was almost translucent, but the most profound change was in Eleanor. I found her a few days later, sitting by the window in her room, staring out at the rain-streaked garden. She was not wearing one of her magnificent gowns, but a simple dressing robe, her glorious hair uncombed. The fire in her was gone, replaced by a damp, smoldering confusion. "I still do not understand," she said, her voice flat and empty. "I did everything I was told. I was perfect. I wore the right gowns. I said the right things. I was beautiful. I was the diamond. Isn't that what is supposed to matter?" Her question was not aimed at me, but at the universe, at the fundamental laws of her world which had suddenly been proven false. For the first time, I felt a deep, aching pity for her. She had been as much a victim of our mother's value system as I had. She had been raised to be a beautiful object, and now she had discovered that her very essence was, to the one man who mattered most, irrelevant. "It is what Mama told us mattered," I said gently, sitting in a chair near her. "And for most of the world, perhaps it does. But for Alexander, it was simply a color he could not see." She looked at me then, truly looked at me, and in her sky-blue eyes, I saw the first, terrifying glimmer of a world beyond the mirror. Our wedding was not the grand, ostentatious affair my mother had planned for Eleanor. It was a quiet, elegant ceremony at the Duke's country seat, attended by only our closest friends and family. It was a day filled not with pomp and circumstance, but with a profound sense of peace and rightness. When I walked down the aisle, I did not feel plain. I felt seen. Truly and completely seen by the one man whose opinion I had come to cherish. My new life as the Duchess of Blackwood was a revelation. I moved into Alexander's world, and instead of being a shadow, I became a central pillar. The vast ducal estates, the complex web of investments, the correspondence from tenants and politicians, it all became our shared responsibility. I read every letter aloud to him, my voice giving shape and context to the words on the page. We would walk the grounds together, my hand on his arm, and I would describe the ancient oaks like stooped old men with mossy green beards, or the progress of a new building, detailing the scent of fresh-cut timber and the rhythmic song of the stonemason's hammer. I became his eyes, his memory, his trusted confidant. He in turn trusted me implicitly, valuing my insights and my intelligence. He cherished the very qualities my family had dismissed as secondary, and under the warmth of his regard, I blossomed. The fortunes of the Fishers predictably declined. Having fumbled such a magnificent prize, my mother lost her credibility as a social power broker. She became a bitter, withdrawn woman, perpetually mourning the future that had been stolen from her. My father, surprisingly, seemed almost relieved to be free of her relentless social climbing. He spent more and more time in his library, and on my visits home, he and I would sit together for hours, speaking of books and politics, forging a tentative, belated connection. Eleanor's fate was perhaps the most poignant. A year later, she married a minor baron with a respectable name but a modest fortune. It was a good match, but a pale shadow of the ducal coronet she had been promised. Her marriage was one of convenience, built on the foundations of her fading beauty and his need for a pretty hostess. Yet something in her had irrevocably shifted. The shock of Alexander's choice had forced her to begin the slow, painful work of cultivating an inner life. On a visit to her new home, I found her not in the drawing room, but in a small sitting room, a book of poetry open in her lap. It was the very same volume of Keats I had read to Alexander. She looked up at me, a shy, uncertain smile on her face. "I'm trying to understand," she said softly. It was a small beginning, but it was a beginning nonetheless. Years passed, the world turned, seasons changed, and our life together deepened into a love that was as quiet and steadfast as the ancient trees on our estate. We had 2 children, a son with my quiet nature and a daughter with Alexander's unshakable resolve. Our home was not a place of grand display, but of warmth, laughter, and the music of our children's voices. One evening, years after our wedding, Alexander and I were sitting on a bench in our garden as the day came to a close. Our son was a short distance away, his eyes closed, listening intently, as Alexander taught him to distinguish the song of the thrush from that of the blackbird. My husband was a man at peace, a man who had built a world of richness and texture that no sighted person could fully appreciate. He reached out and found my hand, his fingers lacing through mine with familiar ease. "The air is growing cool," he said. a smile playing on his lips. The sun must be setting. Describe it for me, my love. I looked to the west, where the sky was ablaze with color. I leaned my head against his shoulder, and in the voice that he loved, the voice that had painted his world for him, I began to tell him of the streaks of rose and gold, the soft purple underbelly of the clouds, and the final brilliant flare of crimson as the sun dipped below the horizon. My family had believed the world was a mirror, and they had spent their lives polishing my sister's beautiful reflection, hoping it would catch the eye of a prince. They never understood that, for the man I loved, the world was not a mirror, it was a symphony, and all he had ever needed was someone to sit with him in the dark and help him hear the music. That's my story. It's the story of how the greatest perceived weakness in a man, his blindness, became his greatest strength, allowing him to see a truth that everyone else's eyes had missed. It taught me that our true value is rarely found in the qualities the world chooses to celebrate. It is often hidden in the quiet corners of our being, waiting for the right person to come along and listen. Now I'd love to hear from you. Share your story in the comments below. Have you ever been underestimated, only to find your own unexpected path to happiness and proving everyone wrong? I promise I read as many of your comments as I can. And please don't forget to like this video if our story resonated with you. And subscribe for more stories about finding strength in the most unexpected places. Thank you so much for listening to me today. Remember, your true value is never defined by how others see you, but by the beautiful, intricate world you build within yourself.